Greetings, it's Owlet here with another Sherlock review. It's been 2 years, if not more, since my last Sherlock review, and in the meantime I have been watching Elementary, so that was sort of playing in my mind as I watched new BBC Sherlock, only because the pacing of the shows are very different. I don't think they should be compared in any way because they're completely different interpretations of the books, much in the same way that House is nothing like BBC Sherlock or like Granada Holmes. So it was so great to have everybody back. I feel like the casting for Sherlock is spot on and everyone does an amazing job, particularly Martin Freeman. But even better than that, we had his actual wife playing Mary, and I feel like Mary was really well written, and I'm glad that Sherlock wasn't too against the idea of John getting married, because in the books he's already married to Mary before Sherlock disappears, and also I felt like in the movies with Sherlock he was far too aggressive towards not having John get married, and really in the books it doesn't change anything that they're married. The dynamics between Sherlock and John remain the same. In fact, when Sherlock comes back, almost nothing's different. Sherlock asks if John will accompany him on a case, and John says something like, whenever you like, wherever you like, sort of thing. So he's pretty much just like, it doesn't matter that I've got a wife or anything, you're back now, I'm 100% dedicated to going on cases with you. And I felt like that, as far as canon goes, this episode was really quite good in the return of Sherlock Holmes, because the way he reunited with Lestrade was beautiful and spot on, just like that hug and everything was great. I felt like with Mrs. Hudson going into hysterics, that was like dead on from the books. I was a little bit iffy about how John and Sherlock reunited, mainly because I kind of wanted John to faint like he does in the books, but I also think that given Martin Freeman's characterization of John, where he's super aggressive and frustrated, that the way they did it was far better. I felt like it was funny that he beat him up twice, but by the third time it was kind of drawn out, it lost its humour. Like, yes, try to strangle him, then break his nose, but maybe, I mean, then like split his lip, but don't go and break his nose. Like, it just kind of, it was not actually one of those jokes that continued to get funnier the longer it went, but I could be wrong. I liked that Mary was also supportive of John and Sherlock's friendship. I didn't like how quickly John forgave Sherlock. Mind you, he did have a few days to stew and get increasingly frustrated, and I loved the jump cuts and how they managed to sneak in the whole F off and piss pot and all that. That was very clever and very amusing. The cinematography was flawless as usual. Loved the train scenes. Felt like they overdid a little bit of the green screen flashback things, which was my biggest issue with the episode of Hounds in season 2, so I was not like, oh my gosh, yes, let's bring that back. But overall it had a good balance between him using his mind palace and them overlaying the text. They're really good with their typography. Loved the motorcycle scene and how Mary's texts were in a different colour. It almost gave her like her own character, and she fitted quite seamlessly into the show. I love that Benedict's parents played his parents, and I also loved how normal Sherlock Holmes' parents were, because in the books his family life was predominantly normal. Like, even though Sherlock is quite an extreme character, and as is Mycroft, they weren't from extreme conditions. And I think a lot of people misinterpret that, so I thought that was good that they were just ordinary, and John was just as baffled by that. I loved the power plays between Mycroft and Sherlock, particularly the fact that they were playing Operation was hilarious. And I liked that they chucked the beanie to each other and had like a deduction game. It was almost like a duel of intellects. Mycroft was back on his A game as well. Mark Gatiss does a brilliant job of writing the show and being in the show. The only issue I did have, well, I had 2 big issues, but nothing major, was that I didn't like how they dealt with Moran. I didn't like the train scene at all, because I feel like Sherlock keeps crying wolf about really important things, and unless it's going to be important to the plot, like later on, he really won't be able to get out of a situation, but John won't believe it, and it will be everyone's undoing. I just felt like it was a massive douchebag move from Sherlock to pretend that he didn't know how to blow up the bomb. He knew how bad John had been without him, and he knew the emotional devastation of that, and I felt like after the incident in Hounds, when he purposely triggered an anxiety attack, that maybe he'd learned his lesson, but I guess maybe we're supposed to watch as viewers that Sherlock never really changes, and so he's always going to play those games, and I suppose it's good for John to realise that too. But I feel like John deserves better, and that Sherlock treated Molly better in this episode than he treated John, and I don't know if that was like a defense mechanism because John wasn't accepting Sherlock back into his life as readily as Sherlock would have liked, so he was acting out, but it was a bit bizarre. I just thought, wow, you're pretending that you don't know how to solve the situation again and basically making John cry and putting him through even more trauma. That's not a good definition of friendship. And the other issue was in relation to that was in the books when they go to defeat Moran, I really love how it's written, and it's that they have to put like a fake Sherlock up in the Baker Street window, and then John and Sherlock watch on from the shadows as Moran sets up his sniper, and then they take him out that way. And the cops are standing by though, which is what they were doing in the train, so I guess it's a more unique take on it, but it just wasn't as fun, I guess, because Sherlock was being more of a douche, whereas in the book it's more like them bonding. And with them bonding, I thought that the platonic relationship was really well established, but I don't know why they keep having John have to protest so aggressively about the idea that he could be gay, because they had him say that he's like, I've met someone, I've moved on, which were terms that you do use in general to someone that you've loved. And while I do definitely understand that you can love someone of the same gender and it not mean that you're gay, because sexuality is really fluid, and there are definitely people who are aggressive towards labels, and I can sympathize with that. I just feel like sometimes in the show it comes across wrong, and like maybe John is saying, look, I'm not gay in the sense that I think that I'm gay in the sense that you mean, Mrs. Hudson, but I definitely did love Sherlock, but you know, I've had to move on. So I think I can kind of see where the show is coming from, but I think they need to be a bit more careful in how they deliver that, because sometimes it can be interpreted as homophobic. I mean, you would hope that it's not being that, given its history, but you never know. I didn't like how Anderson was clearly a dig at the fans. Like, he was dressed in in John's jumper, and you know, he had all these crazy theories about how he died, and I understand that in the show was coming out of guilt, but it was definitely the writers breaking the fourth wall and having a go at like Tumblr and the extreme fans, and on one level it was amusing, but given the fact that it's Anderson and he is considered like the dumbest person in the show, it was a slight dig, but the writers and the directors have every right to vent their frustration with how fans have handled the show, as much as we as fans have rights to vent our frustration towards the show. So I feel like we're on even playing field now, maybe. But overall, it was a really great episode, and I look forward to the next one, which is coming up really soon. I'm a bit surprised that they're playing them so close together. I kind of like it to last a bit longer, because we're going to have, what, 2/3 of the show done in 1 week, but that's okay, because there'll always be the books. So if this is the last season that we get from Sherlock, which I kind of get the feeling it will be, then just remember, guys, Arthur Conan Doyle begrudgingly wrote a hell of a lot of stories, and they are always ready to be read. But until then, toodles. One final thing I forgot to mention is I like that Sherlock dressed up as a French waiter, because I feel like what BBC Sherlock was lacking was Sherlock doing his disguises and putting on silly voices, which he does a lot in the books and somehow manages to fool John. I do feel like sometimes in the book maybe the costumes are a bit more detailed than a priest collar or a mascara mustache, but for the most part that was very amusing, and I quite enjoyed that. It was nice to have lots of canon references, because I think the fact that Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat are so dedicated to the original text makes watching the show all the more rewarding, and that as a fan is great fun, because then you can always play bingo or be like, oh, I know that reference, oh, I know that one. So that's always great. And that's it. Toodles.